Let's talk about giving because giving didn't get harder because your vision moment or your sermon series didn't work. Giving has gotten harder in church because the landscape of giving has changed, and in some cases, dramatically. And you know what? Most churches, they never really have thought about how to update their leadership assumptions around giving. So let's talk about that in this episode. If you've been leading a church for, more than, let's say, 5 years, and I hate to go back to 2020, but that's when a lot of things began to shift. Well, it began to shift before that, right? But like any crisis accelerates and illuminates, and that's what 2020 was. It was a crisis. And we've had several other smaller but important crises since then, and they all accelerate what was already happening. And so if you've been leading a church during that 5-year span for especially more than 5 years, if you remember what things were like in maybe 2010, 2015, even 2017, 18, you've probably felt this kind of quietly. Right, you look at attendance and maybe it's decent, or I know I work with lots of churches that have very strong attendance right now. The budget feels tighter though. I mean, attendance is good, engagement feels okay, people seem excited, but the constraints on that budget just feel tighter and tighter, and margin is thinner maybe than it's ever been. And here's the hard part. I mean, if one or two families moved, everything would change in your budget. And what's worse is if you don't already kind of know how to talk about this and figure it out, then the pressure builds and you end up just carrying it. I mean, listen, for years, I think we assumed that attendance and giving were kind of inseparable. And in a way, that was true for a very long time, right? The more people that were in the room meant the more money in the plate. But that assumption no longer holds true. And you probably already know that, right? Over the last 5 years, generosity, it didn't just kind of fluctuate. It fundamentally changed. Okay, think of all the things that we've experienced. There's economic instability that has been stacked on top of inflation. Digital habits have certainly replaced physical rhythms. Trust in institutions has shifted dramatically. I'm working on a whole thing on that right now, where how expressive individualism has led down this pathway that eventually causes us to believe only in ourselves, which means we don't believe in institutions. For instance, the church. By the way, fewer households probably are now participating in giving at your church than in the past, at least by a percentage, it's fewer households, which means a smaller group of people are carrying a larger portion of that budget load for you. I mean, if giving feels heavier, that's not a shock. It's not a personal failure. It's really just a leadership pressure. But it's often created, and I mentioned this earlier, by maybe some of those outdated assumptions. So here's the most important reframe that I can kind of offer you. Let's think about this as a paradigm shift. What most churches simply need to do is rethink how they approach generosity. Like there really is just a strategy gap here, right? Whenever there's a gap, it typically comes back to our intentional planning, our strategy. So when things change, we just develop a new plan, a new strategy. Now, we don't change the mission, we don't change the vision necessarily, but our approach, our ministry model, or our strategy, that's always up for interpretation. It's always up for a potential change. So specifically, there is a discipleship gap right now that exists around generosity. And what healthy churches today are doing, there's a few things that they're doing. One, healthy churches, financially healthy churches, right? They've stopped treating giving like an event, and they have really begun treating it like a system, or leading it like a system. I mean, think about it. Giving really did move from something that happens on Sunday, right, to something that is really formed over time. I mean, we used to rely on, at my church, we did bucket giving, right? We didn't have plates. I miss those plates. When I was a kid, you put change in it and it'd rattle around. I love that noise. We didn't do that. We did buckets. Well, when people stopped attending so frequently, when the frequency of attendance shifted, we measured that. We were about 1.4 times a Sunday, and that was right before the pandemic. It got worse after, right? So if we're counting on Sunday morning to drive most of our giving, we're counting on something that isn't going to work anymore. That's the first thing that they've done. The second thing they've done is healthy, kind of financially healthy churches. They've normalized consistency of giving. Now, I know we probably all talk about percentage plan, progressive giving to our churches. We talk about tithing. That's all wonderful conversations, and we should have those conversations. But working towards consistency becomes really important when people aren't attending as frequently. So, for instance, recurring giving is not like a tech feature in an online platform, right? That's a real spiritual practice that brings stability to both kind of the people in your church and to the mission of your church. For years and years when I was the lead pastor at Woodstock City Church, I would pull my phone out of my pocket on Sundays and say, our family gives online. In fact, the most fun button on the internet is this recurring giving button. If you push it, you're going to be amazed at how great things get for you, And we would have a little fun, but we would also talk about it very seriously, that we automate the things that are important for us. And so if giving is important to us as a follower of Jesus, well, we should automate that. Of course, you can automate that through other means, the bank, things like that. But talking about it digitally was really critical when people aren't in the room every week like they used to. All right, the third thing that financially healthy churches do, they've learned to communicate reality. This is important. I think for a long time, and I hope you're not one of these pastors, but you might be, and that's okay, I understand. I think as a pastor, we feel the need to project strength or project confidence in every area of leadership, spiritual leadership, organizational leadership. We don't want to come across as we don't know. In fact, a lot of us pastors struggle to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, because we're supposed to know, or at least people expect that we're supposed to know. And so when it comes to financials, it's interesting. I've actually watched some of the most healthy financial churches just talk openly about finances, and not just in small behind the door meetings, like sometimes even in front of the entire congregation. I mean, think about it. Inflation hasn't just affected families, it's affecting ministry. It's affecting ministry margin. And so when you as a pastor, when we can name realities with clarity, actually we gain trust. When I was leading at Woodstock City Church, I don't know that this would work anymore, but we did this thing after services every week called Next. Again, I don't know that I would name it that anymore, but just roll with the idea for a minute. We called it Next. It was a 10-minute gathering after the service for anybody who wanted to consider taking a next step around, and we had a revolving kind of door of topics: volunteering, groups, baptism, right? We did one called Discover Woodstock City Church. So 10 minutes to kind of unpack our story, just talk to you about kind of who we are. We also did one on giving. So about once a month, I would stand on the stage and say, hey, today, next, we're going to talk about generosity. And if you've ever wanted to know anything about our church financially, we'll show you the balance sheet. We'll walk you through kind of where your money goes when you give. I was very open and transparent about all of that. Now, here's what was amazing. Our church was, I was very lucky. I get to lead a big church. We, probably had about 4,000 adults on a Sunday. And, when we would do Next Serve or Next Groups, we would have a pretty good attendance, right? Maybe 30, 50, people, which actually as a percentage of 4,000 is pretty small, right? But felt good in the room that many people were wanting to ask questions and take a step. But when we did Next Give, guess how many people came, right? The first time we did it, we had a lot. We had like 40, but from that point forward, it was like single digits usually. But what was amazing is that when I stood on the stage in front of 4,000 adults and said, today you can come to Next Give and we're going to open the, financial back door for you or curtain and let you peek behind it. And because we have nothing to hide and I don't want you to feel like there's anything to hide. I think that's all they needed to hear. They didn't even come to the next gathering because they heard that I was willing to open the curtain and show them what we did financially. I think that alone was enough to build trust. All right, last thing that these healthy churches do, one more. They really reframe generosity more around the mission than ever before, not around maintenance of the mission, right? So like people don't really, they will. Some people will give to keep the lights on, but that isn't as a compelling of an ask. And think about it. People are certainly more spiritually lightweight today than they used to be. And again, a lot of that's our fault. We planted seeds of that, but we're reaping the harvest. But people aren't, as biblically literate. They don't understand tithing. They don't trust God maybe as much as maybe our parents did, or maybe even our generation did when we were a lot younger. Or so go back to the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Just it's different now, right? And so when we can help people see life change connected to generosity, it connects the dots much better, especially for people who are earlier on in their generosity journey, right? When generosity is kind of clearly connected to impact, it really becomes more meaningful and it removes a lot of the awkwardness of the conversation. So how do you do all this? Well, this isn't that hard. It just requires some intentionality, intentional leadership. I don't want you to feel more pressure. This isn't better fundraising language. This is really just how to be more clear with spiritual formation, to have some better systems, and to kind of think about how to be more honest around the communication. Now, you know, if you know me at all, right? I don't want this to just be information, right? I love interesting information and insight and all that, but I'm all about practical help. And so let's make this really, really practical as we kind of wrap up. Here's one very practical thing that you can do this week, okay? Sit down with your leadership team or your elder board or key volunteers or whoever it may be, but sit down with the people who are your trusted kind of advisors around you and just ask one question. What kind of giver does our current system form? I think that's a great question. It's kind of clarifying. Think about what you currently do, and here's what's great. You may not call your current system a system. It may not feel like a system, but even an arbitrary system is still a system. So think about how you treat generosity, how you talk about it, where you talk about it, and this is important, the language that you use, right? Who you kind of talk to mostly, not intentionally maybe, but who you mostly talk to, and ask the question, what kind of giver does our current system form? Does it form consistent participation? Or is it mostly about emotional reactions? Does it form ownership or kind of consumeristic or spectatorship? Does it connect generosity to the mission of the kingdom and the local church, or to just needs? Really, the best question, does it lead people? I love this. Does it lead people from where they are along a generosity journey? Remember, everybody in your church is at a different place in their faith journey, which means they're probably at a different place along their generosity journey. Generosity is not discipleship, but it plays a role in discipleship. And so I've never seen a person who's deep in their faith who is also greedy with their stuff. So generosity plays a role in this. So this conversation that you can have with your lead team or whomever you have around you, just the conversation can reduce some pressure because it may give you some clarity and illuminate some gaps that you didn't know existed. If you begin implementing a little bit of it, it's really going to help start shifting some things in your church. Now, this is a longer-term system, right? A lot of us are experiencing short-term financial problems, and a long-term system doesn't really change the short-term problem immediately. However, if you can implement an effective long-term system, over time, it'll keep you from having short-term problems. And so I'd encourage you to really think about your assumptions around generosity and what you can do to help people engage along a generosity journey in a world that feels very different today than it did in the past.